You're worried about something?
It looks like there's a spotlight on.
Did we start the
Yeah, the sun is really reflecting. Yeah, we're on. We're on. Hi, everybody.
All right.
We're back in Philly, and we have some folks in the Hangouts. We have Dave Poplar. Hey, Dave.
Hi, how's it going?
How are you?
Great.
Good, great. And I think Jason is with us. Hi, Jason. No Jason at the moment. And Erica's here. Hi, Erica.
Hey, Al.
I heard a rumor that autumn is finally coming to the Hudson Valley this weekend.
It is.
It's very exciting. And here to my left, we have Anna Strong Safford. Hello, Anna.
Yo, what up?
Okay. And hi, Anna.
Just thought I'd totally throw you a curveball.
Okay. And Lily's here. Hi, Lily.
Hello.
And Amber Rose.
Hi, Al.
How are you?
I'm
and
fine.
we have holding the portable mic, or at least having it next to him, is Jamie. Say hello, Jamie, with the portable mic. No, use the mic to say hello.
Just wave it around.
Hi.
That's good. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And Leah is behind you, and Hannah is here. And B, who wants to sit all the way back? Maybe she'll sit up front. And Chris and Zach and Adelaide. Okay, a couple of announcements, then we're going to get started. The phone number. Oh my gosh, I didn't write the phone number down. Zach, 610.
616.
616.
3208.
610-616-3208. And hello, Jason. I see Jason there.
Hello, Al.
Hey. So Chris is going to be answering the phones. We have Lily is looking at Twitter. Anna is looking at the forums, right? Amber Rose is looking at Facebook. And just a couple of announcements. We're going to get started. There's a lot we can talk about. I'm going to make a list of our poems so we can get started talking about poems that you want to talk about. We're reviewing essays this week. Essay number 2 on HD. We're hoping that everybody is going to review at least 4 essays. I wanted to do a little show and tell, Zach, of some books that have come in from ModPo people. Carol Stephen, who's in Toronto or Ottawa, and she drove all the way to Montreal to see us, and she brought a bunch of books, and this is one of them. We've known Carol for years. This was the first time we met her, and it was really great. And this book is called Unhook, and it's a chapbook, and it's really great. I read the first 10 pages or so this morning. This is Alana Shaw. Alana Shaw is a famous ModPo CTA, and this is called Where Are We Ate? We Are What We Ate. Consumerism, Poetry, Reshaping Thought. And that's exciting. Got that this summer. Jake Marmer has a new book of poems out called The Neighbor Out of Sound. This is Jake.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really good. He's been working on these poems for a while, and it's out, just out. Bob Boucher from Los Angeles has a book called Flight of the Challenger, Poems and Short Stories. I've been reading these, and Bob tells me, I don't know where that came from, Bob tells me that these poems, some of these are influenced by ModPo, which is really great. And we have a collage. Some people aren't writing poems, they're making Stein collages. And this is Joan Danforth's Stein collage. And she sent us one of these last year. So this is going to be, we're going to give this away to the third caller. The third caller is going to get this in. It comes with a little thing that you stick in and, oops, upside down. Oh, well. Anyway, it's very cool, suitable for framing at home. The first caller is going to get a copy of Ray Armentrout's new book of poems called Wobble.
Wow.
So this is exciting. I know Amber Rose wants to be the first caller. Ringy dingy dingy. Who is it? It's Amber Rose calling from Massachusetts. And you
Rhode Island is not Massachusetts.
Okay. Well, I was just trying to find some other place for you. Anyway, you can't call unless you pick up your phone and call, because it's 610-616-3208. So Eileen Tabios, who is a Filipino-American poet who's really done amazing things adapting the haiku. And she does this sort of crowdsourcing haiku anthology of women and others in her community. And this is an anthology. It's called Hai Naku. And we'll be giving this book away, too. Eileen sent me this book recently. Okay, there's a New York City meetup on Saturday, October 13th at noon. This is Mandana who's organizing it. October 13th at noon, that's this coming weekend, I think, at the 53rd Street branch of the New York Public Library. All right? And I just want to read a list of the poems, and we can get started. We're looking at forums and Twitter, and we'll talk about the poems that people want to talk about. We have in Chapter 3, the Communist Poets chapter, Ruth Lechlittner, Lines for an Abortionist Office, Genevieve Taggart's Interior. We have in the main syllabus of Chapter 4, Harlem Renaissance, we have County Cullen's Incident, County Cullen's Yet Do I Marvel, Claude McKay's If We Must Die, Langston Hughes' Dinner Guest Me, 2 poems by Gwendolyn Brooks, one called Truth and one called Boy Breaking Glass. And I think, Lily, you've probably heard me say in previous years that Boy Breaking Glass is like one of my favorite poems in the course. We keep talking about it. It's an amazing poem. If you haven't reread that, please do. Maybe the best in the course, whatever best means. Robert Frost's Mending Wall is the one poem in Chapter 5. And in the ModPo Plus, there's Other Frost and Other Anti-Frost. And then in Chapter 6, there's just 2 poems, Richard Wilbur's Death of a Toad and, what's Kennedy's name? X.J. Kennedy, Nude Descending a Staircase. Among the poems in ModPo Plus that I hope we'll talk about, some poems by Naomi Raplansky, who was a communist in the 40s and 50s, Kenneth Fearing, Muriel Rukeyser, Bob Brown, C.D. Wright, One Big Self, which is about mass incarceration, George Oppin's ballad, some Williams poems, a Stevens poem, Sean Bonney's Happiness, Anne Spencer, Earth, I Thank You, some Amiri Baraka poems, including a new short one called Note to A.B., Yolanda Wisher, Erica Hunt, The Voice of No, another great poem, Evie Shockley, new poem to ModPo Plus, one-act play, and Richard Wilbur, Cottage Street, 1953, which is about Sylvia Plath and his not being so sure about Sylvia Plath's poetry. All right, so what do we have? Who's got the forums? Anna, what do we got in the forums? I know there's at least 8 posts there.
Yeah,
and it sounds like Chris has got a phone call, too.
Yeah.
Okay. What do we got?
Let's see. One really interesting question we got from Lydia Ostepe earlier this morning.
Yep.
Is there any connection between Boy Breaking Glass and Williams's Between Walls?
Okay. Wow, what a great question. And I actually asked Lydia if she was going to join, and she said, "It's Australia. I'm going to be sleeping." Technically, that's not true.
She might be sleeping.
She could be. It's like 7 a.m.
I could be sleeping right now, dude.
Yeah.
Like I could be.
Lydia, get up. Wake up. Anyway, Lydia will watch the recording of this. Okay, so Boy Breaking Glass and Between Walls. So let's everybody get your Boy Breaking Glass text out. Let's get it out. Let's see. I can't seem to find it. Here it is. Okay. Ambrose, do you want to read that? Would you be willing to read that poem, Boy Breaking Glass, if you have the text? I have the text.
Yeah. Yes, I have it here.
So let's all think of Between Walls while Amber Rose is reading this poem.
Boy Breaking Glass by Gwendolyn Brooks. Whose broken window is a cry of art, success that winks aware as elegance, as a treasonable faith, is raw, is sonic, is old-eyed premiere, our beautiful flaw and terrible ornament, our barbarous and metal little man. I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration, full of pepper and light and salt and night and cargoes. Don't go down the plank if you see there's no extension. Each to his grief, each to his loneliness and fidgety revenge. Nobody knew where I was, and now I am no longer there. The only sanity is a cup of tea. The music is in minors. Each one other is having different weather. It was you. It was you who threw away my name, and this is everything I have for me. Who has not Congress, lobster, love, luau, the Regency Room, the Statue of Liberty runs, a sloppy amalgamation, a mistake, a cliff, a hymn, a snare, and an exceeding sun.
Whoa. So I mean, we should talk about the poem, but I guess let's follow Lydia's question. How might that connect us to the strategy of Between Walls? Anyone have an idea about that? Anna, would you start, and then I'm going to throw it over to Erica Kaufman to see if she has an idea, and we have a phone call, so we'll get to that next. Is there a connection? I mean, obviously there's a lot of differences.
Yeah, a lot of differences. But I suppose in both poems there's an interest in what is typically overlooked or underseen or underappreciated, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Both poems are sort of seeking to make those the subject of poetry.
Mm-hmm. That is one really great parallel. Erica, can you think of another connection between the two?
I think that they're doing this in very different ways, but there's a lot of attention paid to the line
Mm-hmm.
and how the line is working as a unit. In the Brooks, you have a lot of the end stops, like a lot of lines that end with periods.
Yeah.
And, the Williams is the Williams lack of punctuation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'll throw one out, and then I think we should just talk about Boy Breaking Glass for a little bit on its own. The thing I like about the Williams poem is what Anna said. Williams wants to see in places that we forgot to see, that artists think are not worth looking at. These are abandoned places. They're typically urban places that everybody thinks are ugly, and Williams has this project of wanting to restore to beauty things that people normally think of as not beautiful, in the spirit of the kind of modernism I admire, which is anything can be the subject of a poem, anything can be the subject of art, no matter how low. And it ends with the shining, a positive term, among cinders, which is burnt out, negative, death, pieces of a green bottle that had been broken. Somebody broke that bottle. Somebody discarded it, or at the back wings of the hospital, somebody from the upper floor of the hospital flung a bottle, or it just got dropped on the way to the garbage. And this poem is radical in that the poet is seeing something shine, and it's a fragment. What Brooks does is take it definitely to the next level by starting with the assumption that there is an aesthetic, a positive aesthetic to the broken windows theory of urban policing, I guess you could say, that this boy, in Williams, the boy doesn't exist. It's just whatever happened much earlier, and he doesn't even try to imagine the life and art of the person who broke the glass. And Gwendolyn Brooks begins where that poem ends by thinking, okay, whose broken window is a cry of art? So it's like starting where Williams left off. So thank you, Lydia, for the question. Who wants to talk about this poem? Lily, you want to say something about this poem by Brooks?
Yeah, I think I know we don't have to keep talking about the connection or putting it in conversation with the Williams poem, but a huge something that just made me see or think about is that poem is very interested in a more objective look. There's like the scene, the speaker almost disappears. We don't necessarily know he's there, except that we know he's looking at the glass, but
Right.
That's not really part of the poem. Whereas here we have explicit pronouns like our beautiful flaw, our barbarous and metal little man. So I think Brooks is making a very strong, positioning her own self very strongly with the poem. She's not just framing something for us to look at differently. She's very actively interjecting, like, this is our person and we need to take care of him, maybe, or this is a scene that includes us and we are being called to do something, as opposed to, like, we're on a smoke break in the hospital looking at something.
Right. Great. I want to ask a question about that poem. I'm going to ask Jamie, would you give Hannah the mic? The mic's right over there. Sorry, Hannah. And I wonder if Dave Poplar would also answer this question, and maybe Amber Rose wants to join it too. In what way does Gwendolyn Brooks, what sort of strategy as a poet of this poem, linguistic, structural, whatever, what in the poem, the way the poem is written, signals her affinity for, her empathy for this boy who is breaking glass and wanting it to be counted as an expression, as human expression? Is there any indication in the form, not in the content of the poem, that Brooks is on the side of this boy? So I want to start with Hannah, then go to Dave, and then maybe Amber Rose. Hi, Hannah.
Hi. That's a great question. I think that what signals this to me right away is the fact that the title doesn't stand by itself. It's what leads us into the work, and that's where we meet the boy breaking glass. So right away, formally, the title, foregrounds this boy, and we know that every part of the rest of the poem, all of its content, pertains to him.
Great. Fabulous. Dave Poplar, any thoughts on how this poem is written?
I love this poem too. It really gives me the impression of playing with negative space, and that's very similar to what we're dealing with Between Walls. We're talking about negative space. That's all that's there, but there's still some desperate attempt or urge or drive to make something substantive out of this negative space. And this boy in Boy Breaking Glass, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration. We're talking about trying to use negative space because that's all that he has to make something. The poem, the form of it's not very standard, and it's almost as if the stanzas are shards in and of itself. So in that way, you could even read the poem as almost like an homage to broken shards of glass, another form of art made out of that desecration itself. So you could look at it that way.
That was really well said, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration. If I'm going to do that, and if the poem that contains me or that describes me by Brooks is going to do that, then her own work needs to align with me by creating fragments rather than wholes, by creating desecrations rather than overtures. And the poem beautifully falls apart isn't the right phrase, but beautifully goes all over the place, including alliteratively, lobster, love, luau. We're just all over the place, and she's doing it almost in homage to this negative desecration. Anyway, Amber Rose, a thought on this?
Yeah, I have two thoughts to add to the great comments that we had already. The first is that this is one of the few poems, maybe the only poem this week, that has a quotation that has the subject speaking in it. And it's not, so throughout the poem, Brooks's voice is aligned, but she actually creates space in the poem for the subject to speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And if you think that somebody else might be, who might have seen this boy potentially would have said, this is a vandal, part of the, so much of that naming is also a silencing and taking them out of the conversation and not allowing that person to speak forth. But Gwendolyn Brooks puts her voice right alongside the voice of the boy, which is really powerful. And then the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to is that parenthetical right after the first line. It's almost as if the poem, by including that parenthetical formally, the poem is responding to whoever might read that first line and want to check out and say, broken windows, that's not art. Like, already, before you even get into the rest of the poem, formally there's a response in that parenthetical that I think is really powerful.
Yeah. Gwendolyn Brooks, people, doesn't really get much better. And Ray Maxwell is tweeting, "Ooh, deep plunge into Boy Breaking Glass." Like, yeah, there's a lot of Brooks fans out there. And I just want to say before we switch to the person on the phone is that Brooks is thought of in Chicago when she was doing her thing as one of the most important poets of that city. There was a lot of decorum about her. She treated everybody with sort of old-fashioned respect. She was a proper person. She was very polite, very generous. But by the time she writes this poem, she's all those things, and yet at the same time, she's saying, don't assume that a boy breaking a window is a criminal, is a scoundrel, is a thug. Let us take the side of vandals because they might be saying something. And saying something, the way they say it, is a cry for art, not a cry for help, a cry for art. They're expressing themselves, and this gets to count. And I'm expressing solidarity with me by writing a poem like this, which all of my fans thought, what, Gwen? What are you doing? This is crazy. And I think that craziness is so aligned with the kid is teaching her. This kid who's like 2 generations behind her. Amazing person, amazing citizen. So we have someone on the phone.
We do have somebody on the phone. Our first caller was actually Ellie Holt calling from New York. She didn't have a question or a comment other that she's a big fan and saying hello.
So does she get the book though?
I'm not sure. I didn't make that call.
Oh my goodness. What should we do?
I left it up to the panel.
She didn't. How long did she stay on the line?
Oh, we
quite a while.
We talked for a good 45 seconds.
All right. All in favor of Ellie getting a book? Raise your hand. Okay, Jason, should she get a book? Yes, Jason raised his hand. Okay, so Eileen Tabios's edition, it's a kind of 15th year anniversary edition of these remarkable Hey Nakus that she's been promoting. And what I think Eileen Tabios is doing kind of her own version of ModPo by assembling communities of people who are writing in an accessible form. And this is a great thing. So we're going to send that to her. All right. And now we have someone on the phone now.
And we do have somebody on the phone now calling from a little further than New York. We have Dominic calling from the UK.
All right.
Dominic. Okay. Hi, Dominic.
Hi there. How are you?
Great. Can you bring Dominic's sound up a little louder? Dominic, are you Dominic Weston?
I am Dominic Weston.
Hello. How are you?
Hello.
Welcome to ModPo.
Well,
you're a great ModPoer. You know that?
Oh, well, I tried. It's my first time.
You're really good. You say all kinds of cool things.
That's what. Don't ask my colleagues.
Are you sneaking peeks at ModPo while you're at work? How do you do it?
Yeah, I have to.
Yeah.
So, no, but it was interesting. Last week, it was very full on with all the Stein, and I decided to race through it as quickly as possible, which I don't normally do, but then just so it could let it filter down and then have a couple of days to think about things before revisiting. Yeah. And that worked quite well. This week slowed down a bit again, I think, because there are so many different elements. But it's a week at a time.
Well, before we get to your question, I want you to know that we're going to mail you all the way to the UK this new book by Ray Armantrout called Wobble.
Wow.
And this it's brand new, hardcover, and believe me, the mailing cost would be more than the cost of the book probably. But this is what the fuck? We're just trying to be. I don't know what we're doing with this, but in any case, we want you to have this book. And here's an option. Next week, Ray Armantrout herself will be in the webcast at noon. I believe it's noon. Yeah. Ray Armantrout will be, good. And so will Angela Carr, by the way, another really great poet and scholar coming from New York via Canada. Anyway, the two of them will be here. What if I held on to this book and had Ray inscribe it for you, and then we'll mail it?
That would be incredible. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, good. Who's going to remember? Anna, will you remember that?
This feels like my job, yeah.
Okay. Dominic, Anna's going to get Ray to sign it for you to Dominic, which ends in a C, not a K. Yes. And then and Chris will get your surface mail address or whatever that we call this, your non-email address. Surface mail. It's not surface. It's got to go over an ocean.
Earth mail.
Yeah. Anyway, Dominic, what do you want to talk about?
Well, it's Boy Breaking Glass, because this is what I came on to today, and it's such a striking poem, and I enjoyed the video discussion. But what for me, well, there's a couple of things. One thing is picking up on the African American experience in view of slavery and the idea of the cargoes and the plank, and then in the last stanza it says, it was you who threw away my name. And I was wondering, obviously all these poems work on more than one level, but is one of those levels there that, you know, taking Africans from Africa and removing their names, removing their family, lineage, their identity. And then the second thing was that whole last stanza, for me being a Brit, I feel there are a lot of very US-specific resonances and references in there that I'm not familiar with. And so I didn't know if anyone can unpack that. So all that whole list of Congress, Lobster, La Blue Isle, the Regency Room, the Statue of Liberty, that I get bits of it, but I'm not sure I'm maybe picking up on as much as it means to Americans. So I wonder if anyone could open that up for me a bit.
Okay. Dominic, I'm going to remember those two questions. I'm going to ask you to hang up and listen to the responses online, offline, anyway, not on the phone. And that way somebody else can call. But listen, and then we will mail this book to you. And thank you so much for doing ModPo this year. I hope it's not your last year. I hope you'll just hang out next year, do ModPo Plus.
No, well, I'd love to, because I've seen the ModPo Plus, and I thought, this looks really cool, but there is no way.
It's a lot of stuff.
At the same time.
It's a lot of
nice
stuff.
to visit it again, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm going to hang up. There is quite a
Thank you, Dominic.
between the webcast and the phone call.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
So what I want to do is take the liberty of compressing his question into asking a few people to do a close reading of that line, it was you who threw away my name. So I wonder if Erica, Jason, Jamie, and Anna will take that quickly each, if you don't mind. Erica, do you have a thought about that line? It was you who threw away my name. It's in quotes.
I need another minute to formulate.
Okay, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Jason, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, you're perfect.
Okay, great.
We can skip you, too, because Jamie is like a crackerjack.
I mean, to read those two lines to me, they refer back directly to the two couplets. I shall create, if not a note, a whole.
Yeah.
If not an overture, a desecration. And she brilliantly then switches to full of pepper and light and salt and night and cargoes.
Yeah.
So it's in that becoming cargo that that the name is thrown away.
Yes.
And it was you. I think it resonates a lot for me with what's going on in some of the other poems, but it was you. You is a very open pronoun, and it is an accusation of, I think, I think Brooks is really trying to struggle with the paradox of even the beauty of her poem and the language it's written in and the nature of the topic.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you. Erica, do you have a thought about this line?
I appreciate what Jason said a lot. this poem is so full that I kind of struggle to think on my feet about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, the thing that I'm drawn by is the composition of that entire stanza. And I know that Dominic asked about some of the references and the contrast between, and this is everything I have for me, and then who has not Congress, lobster, love, luau, the Regency room. Like, this accusation, it was you, followed up by, a lot of the things on this list are markers of privilege. Like, isn't the Regency room like a fancy restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, lobster is expensive. Congress is Congress. So it seems like there's this kind of detailing of who this you might have been and like the things that one doesn't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I'm still kind of figuring out beyond the fact that I'm not sure what to do with those two lines yet. Mm-hmm. And then the way the poem ends is it seems to be breaking down and then expanding into this exceeding sun. So you get a mistake, a cliff, a hymn, a snare, and an exceeding sun.
Yeah. It is a Brooksian strategy, if ever there was one, that last image. Thank you. Jamie, quickly on this, what do you think?
Yeah, I sort of wanted to tie it back to the first line into Williams, in which she leaves the first line ambiguously unpunctuated when she had sort of very starkly put periods after each thing. Like, it was like, who gets valued, who gets to make art and call what they make art. And I think she's sort of leveling this accusation at the sort of white bourgeois who say like, oh, we're broken, everything is broken, and asking, why are you broken when you don't have to bear the generations of trauma and name robbing that this boy has to bear, and why is his breakage not art and yours is?
Damn. That was a great reading. Yeah, who gets to determine what's whole and what's broken? And why does broken automatically constitute a not art? When are we going to count broken as the state of things? Wow. Anna, quickly on this?
I just want to make a comment on the lobster, because what's so brilliant about that, and I have no idea if this is like an overread or what, but it just kind of pops in my head, so I'm going to go with it. Lobster was so abundant in the water in New England, and lobsters are like these like nasty bottom feeders that like eat like the scum of the ocean. They're disgusting in that way. But lobsters were like, they were so abundant, they were so like you couldn't catch a fish without also catching like a bunch of lobster, like way back in New England, that they were almost exclusively served to like indentured servants and slaves.
Well, I guess the
And
value has been reversed.
Right, and the value's been totally reversed, which is like sort of, maybe it's tangential, maybe it doesn't apply at all, but it seems like maybe a deliberate choice.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you all for that. 610-616-3208. So, Amber Rose, you are looking at Facebook. Anything interesting happening? Or you haven't been looking in a little while?
No, I have been looking. There is a question that's about Robert Frost. If we want to, okay.
Let's hear the question, and then we'll figure out
What to do with it. Yeah, okay. So this is a question from Magdalene, who is tuning in at the midnight hour from Greece. And her question is, since the poem on Mending Wall, since the poem was written in 1914, it led me to the Great War and the image of the soldiers in the trenches. If we read the poem with this in our minds, we get a totally different reading. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a great reading. I don't think the historical reference is there in terms of the timing of the war and the timing of the publication. But I'll just say that I really wish it were true, because I find the poem interesting, Amber Rose, but I don't like its point of view. I've never liked its point of view. and I'm always looking for something to rescue it because it's so complicated. And maybe this idea that this is about the boundaries of war and it would have to be an anti-nationalist poem because of World War I, maybe that's an interesting approach, and I think I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Unless somebody else wants to say something about. So this is Magdalena Castani, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the question. That's a really good question. Somebody needs to research. I think he probably published it before the war started.
Well,
But-
while we're on the topic of sort of the 50s neo-formalists, we do have a fun question in the forums about Richard Wilbur. You want to take that one?
Is that Mark's?
Yeah, Mark's question about Richard Wilbur. Mark writes, "The Death of a Toad looks to me as concrete poetry reminiscent of George Herbert's Easter Wings and some more Renaissance poems." If you're not familiar with the George Herbert, you can quickly Google it. You'll see it's sort of a poem that's in the shape of wings. And is that on purpose? Is Wilbur's poem in the tradition started probably by Herbert, or is Wilbur giving a revival to concrete poetry that leads to conceptual poetry later in the century?
Gosh.
That's like a super generous reading.
It's a really generous reading.
Yeah.
But basically what it says is that Richard Wilbur created that stanza for this poem. He created an artificiality. It's not a standard stanza. It's something he created.
Right.
So in a way, it is kind of concrete in the way it situates the stanza. But I think Mark is really giving Wilbur a lot of credit for creating an experiment. The experiment is in the structure of the stanzas.
Totally.
But what does it say? This is such a funny thing in ModPo to do, because here we are moving quickly past the form, and now I'm saying, what does it say? And what does that poem say? And then we'll move on to another poem.
You could certainly make an argument that what the poem is saying is also making sort of a callback to earlier, Robert Burns to a mouse type, or the John Donne to a flea.
That's a great poem.
High poetic form, writing to like a small animal creature, talking like down to it.
But Robbie Burns writing about a mouse was a very democratic gesture. Like,
it was. This is
I, the great, Scottish poet, can talk to even a mouse. Whereas if I just want Wilbur's, sorry, I'm being like, we always get in trouble when we talk about this poem, don't we? Like people say, be nice to the toad. People have been mad at the way we treat the toad, right? Sorry. I just think Wilbur is satirizing anyone. I just think he's
anyone who would deign to talk down to a toad.
No, just the guy is a suburban guy mowing his lawn, and the toad gets run over, and I don't know. Lily, bail me out.
Well, I sort of read it as like instead of an ode to the toad, I read it as like an ode to a frustrated suburban masculinity that's like projecting its frustration on like murdering a toad with a lawnmower, sort of like a kid with a magnifying glass and like one step above kid with a magnifying glass and ants on the sidewalk. You know what I mean? Like he didn't intentionally kill the toad, maybe, but like he didn't try not to either. And so he's kind of like who cares about this? I'm stuck here. This sucks. I'll write this sort of jokey funeral.
Well, it's a mock heroic.
Yeah.
So he's officially reverent of the toad, but the tone is so mocking, high poetic, right? He dies and he goes off to amphibious heaven, toward misted and ebullient seas and cooling shores.
I mean, the way he says, the thing that cues me to this reading is the castrate lawn. Right. Feels like it's not a reach to say it's about like, maybe you can imagine Wilbur thinking like, if I died, would I get a heroic thing like this? Or, like what's just sort of meditating life and death, but the fact that it's coming specifically from this suburban context where the lawn is castrate, like there's nothing good going on here for me to write a poem about. I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah. Apologies to Mark, because he asked a really good question about the experimentalism of this poem, its concreteness. And we wound up sort of talking about why we don't appreciate the satire. I guess it's worth just saying one more sentence about it, and then we'll find another question. the reason this poem is in the Neo-Formalist week, and the reason why it's thought of as a kind of retreat from modernism, is that it decides to use high poetic language to describe something that is low, and it creates an irony, a virulent irony. And modernism had tried to get away from that irony, so that the broken glass or bits of nature in HD poems were treated as kind of equal partners in the enterprise of living on the planet. And the mock here is this suburbanite runs over a toad, and one might ask, why do suburbanites have to castrate their lawns? Why don't they let the lawns grow up so the toads can actually live their lives? And this guy, not Wilbur, but the speaker, seems to be caught up in that and makes a mock funeral out of the death of the toad that he killed while doing his suburban business. And it does show a mastery on Wilbur's part, but at the expense of the small game. And when I say this, I get accused of being mean to animals. No, I think it's the other way around. I wish the toad would get a shot at talking back. Just like I'm glad that Brooks cares about the boy. It's so easy to think of the boy as small game, when in fact, she's going to take a cue from him. We should be taking a cue from the toad. I'm so sorry. Okay, another question or comment, and we're at 610-616-3208.
Yeah.
What do we got?
I got a good one from Colette Bates about Dinner Guest Me. If we want to sort of turn back to Harlem Renaissance.
Yep.
So Colette writes, when I read Langston Hughes' Dinner Guest Me, I can't help but think of W.B. Du Bois when I read or hear fraise du bois, meaning an expensive strawberry. Is there a connection? For example, is the repetition of the word problem in this poem referring to double, triple consciousness? How influential was Du Bois to this week's poets, and where does his writing fit in the picture of this week's poets? Does it fit at all?
Great.
Yeah, good question.
I'm going to ask B if B could get the mic at some point, B, not right away. Dave, Poplar, and Lily, will you start us off on response to this point that Colette makes about Dinner Guest Me?
Sure. I like the reference to Du Bois. I mean, I think you can't avoid it in a poem like this. And the thing that makes me what makes me think of Du Bois and his whole talented tenth approach is similar to this poem, where in a way this is a very political poem, because it recognizes that there aren't just oppressors out in the world. There's just different types of people. Some people are oppressors, and some people are just complicit in everything that's going on. And these people, these white people at this nice dinner party, they may not be actively trying to oppress, but they are certainly complicit. But they're still the people who may be able to help. So in a sense, what Langston Hughes could be said to be doing in this poem is criticizing them as much as he possibly can, but still in a genteel way, not in a Claude McKay, if we must die type of way, but still pointing out that these are people who are complicit, but there's different levels. There's a political structure that we have to recognize, and if we want to get a seat at the table. And that was essentially Du Bois' whole approach with the Talented Tenth, and trying to work into the society as it exists. So it recognizes that it's not all black and white, so to speak.
That is really the idea of the seat at the table. Think of Du Bois' strategy. I mean, this is like a brilliant playing out of the problem of having a seat at the table, because you can have a seat at the table and it could amount to nothing. Could be even worse than not having a seat at the table. B and Lily, and then Amber Rose has something. B?
I think what Dave said about tackling this in a gentle way, I hadn't really noticed about the poem before, and the line that stuck out to me the most, the first few times I read it, was that the white mind seeks demurely to probe in polite way, and that sense of probing being a painful kind of investigation that is in no way compatible with politeness, makes a massive amount of discomfort for kind of everyone who's at the table. But maybe actually what Hughes is doing is trying to probe back in some other kind of, or trying to be polite and probing in some other kind of way. So I'm not sure, but that it just seemed interesting that this is polite, and this the enjoyment of all of the wonderful things that are listed. It's like, okay, I can get on board with you to some extent, but I'm also going to politely push back. Maybe.
Thank you so much. Lily, your thought?
I think for me, the reading of this section of the poem depends on how you read these lines: the why and wherewithal of darkness USA, wondering how things got this way in current democratic night. I kind of read that as ironic almost, or mocking the white person's like fake woke thing of saying like, but we're a democracy, how can this be happening? Or like, things are so bad lately or something, as coming from this privileged position of like, not understanding that if you're a black person in the United States, it's not a new phenomenon for there to, like, these struggles are not new. You're just, as a white person, newly hearing about them, or maybe newly being asked to get involved or something, or like newly deciding to get involved. So I'm just like kind of wondering, because to me, he's kind of loading up this contrast of like, there's a dark, serious thing. If you really think there's such a dark, serious thing happening, why is your answer to be feeding me fancy, expensive strawberries? Like, we should be out there doing something.
Thank you. Amber Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in to say that in terms of W.E.B. Du Bois, there's also some intertextuality happening. So The Negro Problem was a book. There was a collection of essays called The Negro Problem that came out in 1903. And W.E.B. Du Bois was a contributor to that with Paul Laurence Dunbar and Charles Chestnut. But prior to that, in 1891, I think, there was another book, first in 1891, there was a book called The Negro Problem that was written by William Bruce, who was a senator of Maryland. And then in 1903, a group of black scholars got together and kind of wrote a response text called The Negro Problem. So there's this history of sort of white and black theorizing on this problem that's happening in text, and W.E.B. Du Bois was directly contributing to that, and so I think he was also trying to signal that text and that like literary history.
Great response to Colette's question, which asks to connect the two. And what you're saying basically, and that's such good literary and cultural history, Amber Rose, that the phrase had to go back and forth, or that different parties to the issue wanted to use the phrase to try to keep it from drifting away onto the other side. What about democratic? I mean, I agree with Lily that the tone is bitterly ironic, so I would say sarcastic. Darkness USA, like surfing USA. In other words, it's a phrase that becomes very easy and light on the liberal white side. Hey man, it's Darkness USA, I'm hip to that. And then current democratic night, that sounds like such a shallow analysis of the situation. And it could be capital D democratic night, it isn't. But the allies among Democrats who were dominated by Southern Democrats, therefore civil rights legislation got nowhere because the Democrats were in league with their colleagues from the South, and everything got blocked, and that's the democratic night, capital D. So there's some real attention being paid to the phrasing, to the history of political phrasing here. Yeah.
Can I jump in with a fun fact?
Yes.
W.E. Bois had a daughter, Yolande, who was married to County
Cullen. That's true.
Took my phone.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah. And there was a big controversy because County Cullen was thought of as someone who was very moderate.
Yeah.
Maybe too moderate.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so, wow, I love that. Do we have someone on the phone, Chris?
It's a caller.
No, it's my mistake here.
That's Jason, but we do have someone on the phone. Weren't you talking to somebody?
Yes, this is bizarre. We do have somebody on the phone now.
Maybe that person got frustrated and called Jason.
Jason instead.
Anyway, who's on the phone, Chris?
So the location might give this one away. Austin, Texas.
It's Phil Drexler.
Bingo.
Okay. Hey, Phil. You want to bring him up? Philip Drexler, how are you? Phil? We may have lost him. Okay. Try again, 610-616-3208. All right, let's collect some tweets. Who's on tweets? Lily, are you on tweets? Let's collect some tweets.
I was
Let's
helping
collect some
Amber with
tweets.
something.
And I would like Leah and Erica to respond, to pick a tweet and respond to it. We need to get Leah the mic. And go ahead. Just quote a few tweets.
Sophia, who's clearly watching the webcast remotely.
Sophia DeRose, our
yes.
Sophia?
She did a tweet, which I really loved.
You know why she isn't here tonight?
No?
She messed up her foot.
Oh, that's right.
So
yeah.
she's injured.
Poor Sophia. Hi, Sophia.
Feel better, Sophia.
I'm going to read your tweet now. The toad is only low from the perspective of the man. Maybe we should look at the toad's value from the perspective of the fly. Nice.
That's such a Sophia comment. I love that. All right, another tweet?
Yeah, Colette was joining Dominic's call for unpacking more of the like American-specific references. They were talking specifically about boy breaking glass, but I feel like that's a nice thing for us to remember, and always something good to ask about. Like, or it could just be interesting to talk in general about like what to do in a international class with people who speak many different languages about poetry that comes from a specific American, North American, usually United Statesian context.
Yep, absolutely. We have, one more tweet and then we have a phone caller. Ray Maxwell says, Amber Rose is firing on all cylinders. Thanks, Ray. And thank you, Amber Rose.
Thanks, Ray.
So Colleen Knight, whom we saw up in Montreal, signaling text and literary history, Amber Rose. Yeah. And that is it. I think that's what we're in this profession. I think that's what we're in this profession to do, to learn how to do close readings and then do the literary history necessary to create all the context so that the genius of Brooks can be played out, rather than being ivory tower-ish and separating us from the lives of readers who just read. It aids them to do that work. I mean, your little riff on the Negro problem as a phrase really helps.
Yeah.
This is what we want to do. Become literary historians, people. Leah, you were going to respond, before we go to the phone, you were going to respond to a tweet, but how about if you respond to whatever the phone person says? Can you deal with that? Oh, boy.
I can try.
Okay. All right. We'll let you go second. You don't have to do it right away. Who's on the phone?
All right, let's try this again. Philip Drexler from Austin, Texas.
Okay. All right. Hello, Phil.
Hi, can you hear me now, Al?
Yes, we can. We're good. How are you?
Good. I got away from no resource I was at.
Great.
Excellent.
Great.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk about Robert Frost and his walls.
Okay. Phil, can you do me a favor? Ask your question succinctly, because we're going to wind up soon, and I'd like to be able to take your question and then get a lot of responses to it. So how does that sound?
Okay. Ask and hang up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you ask the question succinctly, then we'll be able to respond and start wrapping up. Thank you.
Sure. I'm wondering from whoever wants to comment on this, if they don't see in the philosophy that is expressed in Mr. Frost's poems a lot of what produced the very ugly, nasty, and divisive passion play that we had to endure the last couple of weeks. with
Yeah.
regard to the Supreme Court
Yes,
nomination.
I see where you're going.
As I still do, there seem to be a lot of walls that got thrown up there
Yeah.
and thought they were justifiably being thrown up by various parties. involved
Right.
in that.
That's perfect.
So that's my question.
Phil, that is a really great question. I'm really glad you asked it because we haven't really talked about, God, the phrase current events doesn't do justice to what we're going through, but to immediate political questions. And I think Frost's Wall is very problematic. So thank you for the question, and thanks for being a ModPo citizen, and I hope things are good down there in Austin. You must be getting a little of that rain, I imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no too much. Time for it to stop. But
All right.
we're okay.
All right, well, hang in there, Phil. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Al.
Okay, thanks. And Chris, that'll be the last question we're going to take tonight from the phone. Okay, so I'm going to start, and then anybody else who wants to chime in on the wall. And Leah, you may or may not have that text in front of you, so I don't know if you're ready to deal with it.
I
But
was just wondering, could you rephrase the question? Because I
I'll
had
be
like
happy.
Yeah,
I'll be
thank
happy
you.
to. I'm going to take some liberties with the way Phil asked it. What is it about Frost's stance, seeming, or at least the speaker's stance about the wall, that can help us have a conversation about current politics? And when I think of the wall, Lily, I think more of questions about immigration and tolerance and property. A little less about the Kavanaugh stuff, except that the Kavanaugh stuff leads to these issues.
Here's the phrase that might help us. But I mean, sorry, I'm not looking at the text, so I'm going to paraphrase it from my memory. There's a section that's something like, if I was going to be making a wall, I would like to know what I was walling in and walling out. And so for me, that resonated with this idea that like accusers of powerful men, like we should hang on because like this sets a dangerous precedent. Almost this idea of like, I don't agree with this, but this is like a popular idea, is like we should know what we're walling in and walling out. Like we should, this false sense of egalitarianism maybe, like that building a wall, Frost doesn't seem to be equal to his neighbor in this poem, but they're both equivalently on the side of a wall. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, this idea that like just because you build a wall doesn't mean that you've equitably like set a boundary or divided something. Like we don't have to be that careful about what we're walling in and walling out from that perspective.
Yeah, I think Frost's speaker is trying to, he thinks of himself as more conscious, more aware, more conscious than the guy on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, it sounds like to me like a more moneyed like Republican person in power saying to a subject like, you know, what's next? Like something bad, worse than this,
well,
whatever.
In the end,
like,
the speaker, and forgive me for applying partisan terms to this, but the speaker of the poem is like as you were hinting at, a more genteel Republican saying, well, I'm not sure I'm in favor of the wall, but it's the custom we do. It's always what we've done. So let's build the wall. And the person on the other side is the guy who never goes behind his father's saying. So is the uneducated country bumpkin version of the same, they both have this unholy alliance about how we need to keep the wall up. And in the end, the wall stays up, even though the speaker seems to be hipper and more conscious of the problems of the wall, like we don't even know why we're putting this wall up, but I still think we should put the wall up. And he forms this awful relationship with this neighbor who says, yeah, let's do the wall. I don't think about it, but let's do the wall. And then the wall stays up. And what Frost feels about this is not entirely clear, but these two characters do maintain the wall, and it sure is beautiful. Leah, what do you think?
I was thinking this isn't about Frost's poem, but more about the notion of wall as a whole throughout the poems that we have been studying. I feel like there are walls as well in Dinner Guest Me and in Boy Breaking Glass. And it's interesting to see how these walls are treated in a way. This had me thinking about the idea of symbolical violence because walls are also all about who's inside, who's kept out. And in Dinner Guest Me, I feel like the fact that everything is in this dinner is very polite, very gentle, does not mean that there isn't a lot of symbolical violence going on here, precisely because everything is very polite and gentle and they are eating very fancy food. But in a way, the speaker is left out of this. And this is a wall that he knows that he cannot break if he wants to stay in the room. There's this kind of ambiguity, if you see what I mean. It's
we
a paradox.
definitely see what you mean. That's really good. That was really good. I'd like to invite some more responses to this this issue. I think we have Erica, Jason, and Dave. Erica, do you have a thought about mending wall in relation to current topics, current politics?
I do. Reading the poem this time around, I kind of feel like you can't help but think about that. There's that moment in the poem where the speaker says, if I could put a notion in his head, why do they make good neighbors, etc. What I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense, like that just sort of makes me think about the ways that walls exclude and the potential for language to work as a wall. And then there's also something, like it feels as though the speaker of the poem is talking down to his neighbor.
Definitely.
And by the end of the poem, the speaker is kind of judging his neighbor for, not getting with the times, for kind of relying on his father's saying.
And yet, they build the wall. And yet they build the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not really clear, Erica, if the poem is ironizing good fences make good neighbors. Everybody who first reads the poem thinks, oh, Frost is really satirizing good fences make good neighbors, except the poem is itself kind of a wall. The poem formally with all that iambic, that inexorable iambic, seems to be building a traditional poetic wall. It's really hard to get across. And so good fences do make good neighbors. And actually, I think everybody sitting around here, I imagine everybody thinks that that's wrong. That is not the right approach to intersubjectivity. Good fences do not make good neighbors. It's wrong. Sorry, Erica.
No, that's okay. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And I also think that the way that the poem is crafted, the way that Frost is using both form and language and dialogue between the speaker and the neighbor, is working as building walls within the poem.
Yeah. I really want to hear more on this, if everybody promises to be really brief. Anna, do you have a quick thought on this? And I think Jamie might. You do, okay.
Private property is theft.
That was a quick one. And and Frost is saying the opposite.
Yes.
Really. I mean, so Frost is in this section because he was thought of as a modernist, but he actually turns out to be an anti-modernist, and he cleverly states the conservative position on subjectivity. He thinks there's a subject and an object, and the reader is the object, and we're very much like the guy on the other side of the wall, and a poem is a wall. And Frost says, modern free verse is like playing tennis without a net. Free verse is like writing a poem where there's no wall. Yes, we say, or I say, yes, take down that wall, Mr. Frost. Sorry, I got a little enthusiastic. Jamie, quickly response to this?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I just sort of saw in connection to the current Kavanaugh stuff, the wall is this sort of abstraction of the patricians maintaining their position in society in a way of keeping out access for those that don't come from top 10 schools, are in fraternities, and aren't male. And I sort of see his language as mirroring that paternalistic, phallocentric idea.
Yeah. Very cool.
Very brief.
That was really good. I also want to say something, and then Anna's going to quote Shirley Collins. I think we all ought to be reminded that we are, when we all agree on this kind of thing, all the cool ModPo people, we're at risk of building a wall so that someone who interprets the poem differently feels like, wait a minute, I'm on the other side of this wall. What are you doing to me? So I really think we need to, if we're going to be partisan, and I think we're being partisan right now, we need to just be, it's obvious that we're partisan, but we need to be really straightforward about it, and we need to hear other points of view. I just want to remind myself, stop being an asshole about the toad and the wall, and listen. So you want to quote Shirley?
Yeah, Shirley says in 2 quick posts, mending walls is an opportunity for neighbors to socialize. And also remember, those New England walls are not that tall. They mark boundaries rather than close off people or views.
Yes. That's totally right.
Yeah,
and
totally
also
true.
this is just as the boy breaking glass is Brooks's point of view about art, and Frost would not like that as art. But they can have an argument about what's art. And Frost is saying that every year I meet my neighbor and we build the wall, and that is what passes for art, because that's what we do. We build wall building, masonry. It's using round stones. It's an art. It's a craft. And it is what means art in the poem. Amber Rose, what do you think of all this wall stuff? You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but...
I guess I agree with you, Al, that walls are not good things. But I am trying to think about how I could make this productive, and I'm hesitant to do that because I don't like to be like, it's not to be like devil's advocate, but I don't know. I'm going to just say what I want to say. So what I do think is helpful, if I were to totally take this out of the political context in which I think he was writing the poem, that when it says, like, you know, we go for a walk and we keep the wall between us or whatever, that I think that there is something about opacity that is useful. Like, I think about the poet Edward Glissant and him writing about opacity, and that we have to have the right to opacity. So recognizing that we are intersubjective, but that doesn't mean that we can assume that we can be fully transparent to one another, and that we have to respect some kind of opacity. But I think opacity is different than a wall, right? Because I think that there's something about a wall that feels like I'm putting this wall here actually because I don't respect you enough to think that if the wall wasn't there, we could both have our space. So I'm going to use this material thing to enforce that kind of respect. So I do think that there's a slight difference there, but I don't know. I guess I wanted to bring in opacity as something that is useful and necessary when thinking about how to be productive in intersubjective conversation.
Yeah, that's really well said. And it gets us back to poetic form. I mean, there is such a thing as opacity that creates a wall that can be very productive. It creates a barrier that you have to try to get over in order to understand. You have to do work. Dickinson builds walls. The House of Possibility, with all those windows, it's still a wall. But I keep thinking that Frost is going about it in a way that I don't find congenial.
And I agree
know
with
that you were saying that.
Yeah.
To me, I call it inexorable iambic. The iambic is so in your face. It is so performed. It is so perfect. It is so Shakespearean. It is so impossibly what it is that you have no room. It's a wall. Those 5 feet, I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. Think about the iams there. They're inescapable. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. You feel like you have no way in.
Yeah.
It is done. He's that good at the iambic, and the wall has been built, and all we can do is kind of do more iambics. Iambic pentameter, which is, the great English literary history. It's really tough to enter that conversation. And no wonder the guy on the other side of the wall doesn't know what to do. Yeah. Okay, we're going to do final words, and I hope everybody will get a chance. So we have a little bit of time, and so let's think. What would you like to say? This week, we've been doing poem by poem, but overall, this week is a great challenge. This is a great challenge. This week is saying a lot of things about modernism and about its potential for disconnection, forgetfulness. It says a lot about intersubjectivity. Claude McKay, whom we didn't talk about, says, I think that that modernists getting rid of the sonnet was a really great thing. However, I think I want to use the sonnet for some radical purposes. And we did, and that's a very troubling thing for people who pranced around for 20 years previous saying, the sonnet is out, the sonnet is fascist, the sonnet is evil. And then McKay saying, the sonnet's a tool. I got something to do here. It's almost as if the sonnet is that stone that the kid throws at the wall to break the glass. So final thoughts, final words. Let's go all the way around. I want to go to, let's go to Anna, then Jason, and then we'll keep going. Anna, quick final thought. And you can do just a shout out or an announcement if you want.
Well, I'll say my office hours are tomorrow at 12.
That's good.
Yeah. And I guess I'll also say that this week is so incredibly challenging for me because a lot of these poems are not my favorite poems to talk about, to say it nicely.
This week?
Yeah.
You mean like the neo-formalists?
Yeah, the neo-formalists. It just doesn't get my engine going, But I do think it's good to be reminded of, in a really sort of visceral way, of what I like to resist and what I like my poems to resist. So here's to poetic resistance and on to the beats.
All right, and on to the beats, yeah. Okay, Jason, quick final word.
My own little pitch is that my office hours will start at 8, and I'll be there until the discussion has come to a close. For some reason, while we were talking about Frost Mending Wall, the poem that I'm most obsessed with this week is a one-act play. And
by Evie Shockley.
By Evie Shockley, which I would love to discuss in my office hours.
Excellent.
That's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Dave Poplar, final thoughts?
Just that I'm looking forward to next week in the Beats, and I love the fact we'll be able to compare Amiri Baraka's incident with County Cullen's incident. I think that is a good teaching tool.
We should definitely do that. Thank you, Dave. And for those of you who are multiple year ModPoers, ModPo Plus for the Beat Week has a lot of new stuff in it. So take a long look at that. Some great stuff in there. Including a couple of nice videos we did in San Francisco.
2 years ago this week, I think.
That was so much fun, Lily. So, Erica, final thought?
My office hours are tomorrow morning at 10. It would be great to continue any of the conversations that we started. And something about this week that I think a lot about is I feel as though this week we get the question of politics and accessibility. So what can a poem do? And how can a poem do that? So what I mean by that is in this week we get, as Al said, a return to things like the sonnet form. And I think it's important to think about why that is and the larger audience or readership that these poems are impacting.
Yeah. Thank you, Erica. Amber Rose, final thought?
Yes. My final thought is before you turn to week 6, to go and reread Truth by Gwendolyn Brooks, which is one of my absolute favorite poems. I think that Truth really, really pushes for some serious self-reflection and self-criticism. And I think in this moment when it's really easy for everyone to say, oh, there's so much wrong happening and injustice and this is all terrible, there's also a lack of folks being ready to like actually wake up when the sun comes, as Gwendolyn Brooks invites us to, and like actually put their money where their mouth is. So continue to be self-critical and let Gwendolyn Brooks help you do that.
And Gwen Brooks shows us what's going to happen when the night years are done. And they've got to be done at some point because the sun's got to come up.
Yes.
Yeah, you make me optimistic sometimes, Amber Rose. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Lily, final thought after that.
Right, yeah, thanks. Just kidding. What you said was great. I canonically have been a person who does not care much for Beat Week, which is coming next. But what I want to say is that I really love that it's followed close. It follows immediately from this week in the class, because I think having a sense of just how a poem can participate in a person's like political project is really helpful to carry forward into Beat Week, and into any of the poems we are reading in the course, which is kind of like what Erica was saying earlier, but especially about the beats, like because it's a movement that moves so quickly into self-parody and then just like plain old parody. I think there's a fly up here. I think it's nice to carry this concept of like what were the goals, what was at stake for the writers. That helps me enjoy it more. Maybe it will help you too.
Good strategy. Thank you. I wonder if B has a final thought. Do you? You want to give her the mic? Who's got the mic? Jamie, you're falling down on the job. Oh, now he's going to turn the mic on for you.
Took it back to turn it on.
I guess I was just thinking as a British person about the international context and the political context. Been here for 8 years, applied for citizenship on Sunday, specifically so that I can vote. You're
going to make it in time?
Next year. I mean, not this year. Okay. But that was a kind of a waking up feeling and being self-critical about why am I just having panic attacks about men assaulting women? Why don't I become a citizen and do something? But the connection that I made was with that list of words that Dominic was asking about, which now
Luau, Regency Room, Congress.
And the way that
Love.
Yeah. Statue of Liberty, Congress.
That's the last one,
And the way that my connection to those words has really changed over the last 8 years, from like Congress being this really abstract thing to being something which now I need to take part in some way. I don't know, maybe that's helpful to the Brits listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, B. So I'm going to wrap up with two quick shout-out. Well, one quick shout-out and one a little more extended. To Ray Maxwell, who's a great tweeter here, Dolphinfish55. From my former career, and Ray's former career was first military and then State Department. From my former career, the development of the sonnet form accompanies the development of modern diplomacy of conversations between nations. It becomes a currency. It's important for us to think about that. And McKay, and we had this conversation earlier this week, McKay's really thinking about it as currency. So later in his life when he said, this poem is universal. It's about anybody who's ready to resist. There's a case that can be made that that's a kind of diplomacy. And the second shout is to Adam Birnbaum, but actually to Adam's daughter, who doesn't get named, who's 13 years old and was my hero of the week. Adam writes that he was so stimulated and so enjoyed the Stein poems this last week. It's hard to put my finger on it, but I just find it totally delightful and funny and creative. It doesn't quite capture it to say that the writing creates a kind of music, because it's more than just sound. The language plays with our patterns of syntax and semantics, and so sets off a different kind of mental fireworks if we pay attention. Also, the repetitions for me make the reading experience mirror my own thought patterns, the way thoughts flow from liminal inchoate impulse into language and back again, back and forth. So I was sitting, rereading If I Told Him, when my 13-year-old daughter came in, and I showed her. She read it straight through, got totally excited, and then said, "Oh, that gives me a great idea," and then wrote out a really nice poem to satisfy a school assignment. So yeah, a kid with an open mind can immediately get that appeal. The difference is spreading. And then I wrote to him and I said, "Can you tell me more about your 13-year-old daughter, how she dealt with this? And did you show her the dance video?" He said, "Yes, I showed her the dance video, which she and I both really loved. She is a dancer herself, and I think she was impressed by this really distinct vocabulary of movement. She and I had a really interesting discussion yesterday about technique across all human disciplines, which I think would make a really good essay in itself. Every raw material we encounter leads to technique for whatever application. So she was thinking through dance technique for kicking, compared to soccer technique for kicking, and the fact that our education and cultural involvement forms our perception of the right way to do things. So her classical dance training forms her perception that a soccer kick is not done right because of posture, arm position, etc., even if the ball is a brilliant goal. She's a bit apprehensive about getting peer feedback on her poem in her English class. Nobody's going to know what to say, she says. Maybe they should all take ModPo. In any case, I will keep on showing my kids things here, and I blabber on and on to them about it." What I really like about that is that Adam is taking ModPo as an opportunity to have a conversation with his daughter, in which his daughter gets to apply her own aesthetics and her own critique of socialization as a young girl, and is daring to write a poem that doesn't make sense, even if in class no one's going to know what to say. So cheers to Adam for sharing. Cheers to his 13-year-old daughter for being like a ModPo person without really knowing it. And I wrote him back and of course said, "Can she take the course? Can she be?" But anyway, so to Adam and his daughter, cheers as we move away from this week and head on to week 6. And B and Hannah and Jamie and Leah, Erica, Jason, Dave, Dominic, and Phil, others who called, Anna, Lily, Amber Rose, Chris, Zach. Thank you so much, Chris and Zach. You guys are amazing. And we will say goodnight, and we will see you in a week. But please go to the office hours and hang out with us. All right. Bye.